in advance, not for what you're going through, but what's going to happen through you after God finished working on you. He says, count it all joy. Chapter 2, he tells them what our parents have been telling us all along. He says, faith without works is dead. I got a Bible reading, church. He says, faith without works is dead. Thought it would be a good idea to park right here and tell somebody that you can want it, you can hope for it, you can pray for it, you can look at it, you can screenshot it, you can Google it, but if you don't work for it, you ain't gonna get it. I know it's bad language. I'll say it again. You can want it. You can hope for it. You can pray for it. You can screenshot it. You can Google it. You can look at it and desire it. But if you don't work for it, you never will get it. Why? Because wanting something and hoping for something and praying for something and looking for something and wishing you had that something is just not good enough. James says if you want it, you've got to work for it, because faith without works is dead. How are you going to pray for a promotion but show up late to work? Faith without works is dead. How are you going to pray for healing but won't take your medication? Faith without works is dead. How you gonna pray for a financial breakthrough but you won't save no money? Faith without works is dead. And no matter what you say out of your mouth, your actions are going to determine exactly what you want. Look at somebody and tell them faith without works is dead. In chapter 3, he takes a moment and he talks about an unruly tongue. It is in this chapter where he says the tongue is a very small member, but it does big damage. Don't need to go there because I think everybody in here know exactly what he's talking about. But in chapter 4, he takes a sharp left turn and he talks about the benefits of having a relationship with God and how it is that if you draw near unto God, that God will in fact return the favor and draw near unto you. He says to them in so many words in this particular chapter that there are some things in your life. Read the first couple of verses. He starts talking about all of the nasty things that they're dealing with, and he knows that change is imminent, but he tells them, listen, if you really want change in your life, it's going to start with you drawing closer to God. And what a word for us today. Many of us are very desperate for change in our lives. And so we're changing everything else while negating the one relationship that can get us there. Hear me this morning. If you want to sure enough see movement in your life, in your money, and in everything else, you are going to have to get closer to God. If you want a year like you've never seen before, if you want to go higher than you've ever been, if you want a peace that surpasses all understanding, if you want to be able to go through the darkest valley of your life and then hold your head up high like ain't nothing bothering you, if you want to cry in the midnight hour and then show up on Monday with your game face, if you really want to get through what you're going through and fight through what you're fighting through, here is the secret. You've got to draw near unto God, and when you draw near to God, God is going to return the favor and draw himself back to you. And I want to just argue for a few moments here, a few things that you need to do, friends, in order to draw close and to build a healthy relationship with God. And here it is, number one, the very first thing you need is consistency. You can't build any relationship without consistency. You can't grow anything without consistency. You cannot reach your full potential without consistency. And you sure enough can't build a relationship with God without consistency. One writer suggested that consistency is what transforms average into excellence. Another contended that consistency is better than perfection. But I love what its motivational speaker Tony Robbins argued. He argued and left on record, catch this, he suggests that it's not what we do once in a while that shapes our lives. He argues that it's what we do consistently that shapes our lives. In so many words, he argues, friends, that it's not what you do every now and again that makes the difference in your life, but it's the thing that you do all the time that actually shapes your life. And if you are to have a relationship with God, you've got to work on this thing consistently. Let the church shout, consistently. You've got to do it when you feel like it and when you don't feel like it. You've got to do it when you feel like you're worthy and when you feel like you're unworthy. Building a relationship with God requires consistency. Let the church shout, consistency. I wonder, friends, what our lives would be like if we gave the same amount of consistency to God as we give everything else. I wonder what our lives would be like if we gave God the same amount of consistency as we do Instagram and Facebook. I wonder what our lives would be like if we gave God the same amount of consistency as we do gossip. And as we do hanging out with our friends. Some of us are so faithful with our friends, but unfaithful to God. So some of us are so faithful with making sure we get our nails done every 2 weeks, but so inconsistent with praying to God. Some of us are so consistent making sure I go every week to the barber shop at the same time to get my hair cut. But I wonder what our lives would be like if we were as consistent with God as we are everything else. In order to build a strong relationship with God, you have to have what class? Consistency. I spend, as you can quite imagine, countless of hours in conversations with people concerning the church and the pandemic, and if the church actually has a future in the next generation. Over the last couple of months, over the last year or so, I have sat at tables with preachers as we've tried to put our minds together to try to make ministry attractive, and trying to find a way to raise money and keep money in, and trying to find a way to get members in and keep members steady. We've sat around tables and have tried to really put our minds together. And whenever we come to these moments, the question always comes about, is people staying away from church and God because of the pandemic? Every time this particular talking point comes up, I make it my business to remind them that it ain't the pandemic that's keeping people away from God. As a matter of fact, some people, all they were looking for from the begin with was a reason not to come to church. And the pandemic was the one reason they decided they were already looking. In these conversations, we're talking about attendance and worship, and I've got to remind them, no, it's not the pandemic that keeps people from worship. It is the mindsets of people who have decided to put God on the back burner that's put the church ultimately in this rigmarole. There are people who have decided to take God out of their lives and fill their lives with everything else as if though they don't need God. They argue that it's the pandemic, but I oftentimes got to shoot back and ask, how is it a pandemic, but you still go to work? It's a pandemic, but you still go to get your nails done. It's a pandemic, but you still go to the hairdresser. It's a pandemic, but you still go to birthday parties. It's a pandemic, but you still go out to dinner when you feel like it. It's a pandemic, but you still have company in your house when you feel like having company. It's a pandemic, but you still go to Target and the mall and everywhere else. But when it comes down to God and when it comes down to Sunday morning, we've got an excuse for everything, an excuse with everything under the sun. But hear me when I tell you, you will never ever be able to build a solid relationship with God until you get some consistency in your life. Look at somebody and tell them, get some consistency with God. God is not something you do when you're just happy. It's not something you do when everything is going well in your life. It's not something you do when you feel like popping your head in the door and when you run out of options. But God should be something that you are consistent with. Why? Because he's consistent with you. We got time for everything else and everybody else. But where does God fit into your life? You need consistency. The reason why so many of us struggle in this area, feels like church is not for us, feel like we don't need the church, is because you got one foot out and one foot in. Let me tell you that if you ever get consistent with worship, if you ever get consistent with God, or when you start